tried to keep its promises to its allies and tried to keep Russia in the First World War. And this, of course, was immensely unpopular with Russians. So, and the Bolsheviks used this discontent and the Russian defeats against Germany and its allies as a tool to agitate people against provisional government. And then later in the year 1917 there was again a revolution, or one might rather say it was a armed coup d'etat, where the Bolshevik-led soldiers and sailors overthrew the provisional government. So the first Russian Revolution of 1917 was sort of more spontaneous uprising, and the other one was a Bolshevik plot.
Interesting. Was there some type of peace agreement that was made between Germany and Russia at this time when they surrendered?
Yeah, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, that is completely correct. In 1918 the Bolshevik government was forced to sign a peace treaty with Germany.
And how do we define forced in this context?
Well, in a sense that there wasn't much in that Bolsheviks could do if Germans wanted to march to St. Petersburg, for example. So at this moment, the new Soviet government, it barely controlled the territory outside Moscow and St. Petersburg. So, and there wasn't, the Red Army was founded, but it didn't have really at this point capacity to fight.
Oh, so the Red Army is strictly for the Communist Army and not for the Imperialist Army?
Well, the Imperial Russian Army disintegrated following the revolution, but then Trotsky, who was one of the he was one of the founders of the Red Army, and under him, of course, Bolsheviks started to organize a new Russian army, the Peasants and Workers' Red Army.
Okay. So then what,
Well,
I mean, like, for example, the peace treaty that was made with Germany, I guess it must have made Germany be able to take all of its troops from the Eastern Front to the Western Front.
Yeah, that's right. And there was a big German offensive in the Western Front, which in the end game failed. And with arrival with joining of United States,
like a lot of people don't think about that, I think.
Yeah.
Because we're always told that Germany lost the World War, and you don't mention if it's first or second, but they lost the World War because they were fighting a two-front war, and they had to divide their resources. But it's kind of unique that in this case, in the end of First World War, they really didn't have to do that. They could focus more or less all to the west, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, for a very short period. So of course, having to fight a two-front war was a big burden for German military for much of the war, and for this reason, it was a great success that through revolution, Russia came out of the war, and Germany could for a while concentrate all of its forces on the Western Front. But of course, as the United States joined the war against Germany, of course, and with Britain and France being able to defend successfully enough in Western Front, and with revolutionary turmoil in Germany, it was like a short-term advantage, and it didn't prevent German defeat. But for a while, it seemed that Germany could control like Eastern Europe, like Baltic states and Poland, and Finland would have become part of German sphere of influence.
Yeah. Just a quick question. In the top right of the screen, do you see the recording button, like that the time is ticking in?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So Russia lost the war, and this must have negative. I don't know what was in the peace treaty, but this must have negatively affected them. Maybe they had to give something to Germany or something like that.
Yeah, but of course, with Germany being defeated in the First World War, it wasn't like a long-term defeat.
Yeah.
So, but then Russia descended into civil war. So the Bolsheviks, they were opposed by various groups. There were the White Armies, like some were monarchists who wanted to restore the empire. Some were like nationalists, but
that's very fascinating in a way that you have these different forces within a country that wants different things, and you don't know which one is gonna come out on top.
Yeah, that's right, and it is one of the most complicated, maybe wars that can. I would like to maybe compare it like what happened in Syria, like during after the Arab Spring, where there were like all these groups fighting with each other, and in Russia happened the same thing. There was like all these new nation states. There were Finland and Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and Poland wanting to gain independence. They were of course Bolsheviks. There were the White Armies. The peasants had their own so-called Green Armies, which opposed both the Bolsheviks and the Whites. Ukrainians wanted to gain independence, and you could list all sorts of other groups as well. But Bolsheviks came on top, and I think one of the reasons was because they controlled the industrial heartland of Russia. They controlled Moscow and Petrograd. St. Petersburg was called Petrograd at this point, and they won because they had the industry, they had the manpower, and also because the sort of Western allies, which had been weakened by the First World War, really couldn't send troops to oppose the Bolsheviks as much. So
you mean that these Western, more similar to the West groups, were previously supported by Western interests, but not as much during the war?
Well, the White Armies, they were supported by France and Britain, for example. So, of course, during wartime, Russian Empire was allied to France and Britain, for example. And, of course, they tried to oppose the Bolsheviks. French sent troops to Odessa, for example. British landed in Murmansk and Archangel, for example. But this wasn't enough. And in Far East, like in Vladivostok, there were Americans and Japanese, for example. But this sort of Western intervention wasn't enough. And the White Armies, they couldn't win, and they were faced with, of course, workers and peasants for the most part supported Bolsheviks. No, peasants, for example, not because they loved Lenin and his policies, for example, but they were afraid that the White Armies would give back the land to the landowners, like the nobles. And this was peasant feared that. And Lenin was very intelligent revolutionary leader in that sense that he could make tactical retreats. He could, for example, recognize the Baltic states, Finland, and not because he was a great friend of these new nation states, but because he thought it would be able to buy time for Bolshevik regime to regroup its forces. And white armies, they believed in sort of one and united Russia. They didn't want to recognize the independence of these new states, and this was a big mistake in the sense that these states would have been able to support white armies against the Bolsheviks. So if Finland had, for example, joined the war against Bolsheviks, maybe Petrograd would have fallen to the hands of the white armies.
That's very interesting. That's reminiscent of what you mentioned earlier with Navalny and Putin, the difference. So you perhaps would say that the White Army was more similar to Putin's current view, the imperialist view, that you want to include everything in the Russian empire rather than separate the other peoples.
Yeah, that's the right. And in some sense, Putin is a descendant of the white generals as well. But
is it fair to say that the White Army was more popular with the Western nations at that time, like France and Britain?
It was certainly sort of an ally with them, but of course, I think in some sense they were, of course, not giving enough aid to the white armies, but of course, for the lack of support from the peasants and the new nation states, I think it was more important factor in their defeat. And they could have, if they hadn't had done so many, if they hadn't stuck in the past with all these imperialist fantasies, they would have probably won, because the Bolsheviks, with all the terror and brutality and all the revolutionary turmoil, they weren't exactly popular.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense if it's a situation like that, you strategically would want to have as many allies as possible.
Yeah.
And by pissing everybody off, saying that you need to belong to us, it's not like that's a good way to win allies.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that was smart of the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
To get a lot of allies, or at least not opponents and enemies.
Yeah, and it was very clever tactical move. So when later Stalin became to power, and already when Lenin was in power, they tried to restore their control over all these land, all the Baltic states and Poland, for example. So, but it was.
So it was just a smart move. It wasn't any honesty necessarily in it.
Yeah. Lenin, I don't think Lenin believed honestly in the giving in the self-determination of people.
Right, because he wanted to expand communism, if I'm not mistaken.
A world revolution, if possible.
So why would he want to exclude countries from them, right? There would be no incentive for him to want to exclude, say, Latvia.
Yeah.
Since he wants to, like, it's an expansionist ideology by its nature.
Yeah, it was.
And it wouldn't be possible to spread communism without incorporating them into the Soviet Union, or what do you think?
Well, maybe there was a belief at the time of the sort of world socialist state of course, in communism, the ideal was, of course, that eventually when everyone moved to communism, state itself would disappear. But of course, the sort of interim solution was to have a sort of world Soviet state, maybe.
Wait, so the end goal of communism was to abolish the nation state?
Not just the nation state, but the state altogether, to create sort of classless society.
But who would organize it?
Well, that is one of the good questions, and one of the reasons why communism didn't succeed, because I don't think they had a clear vision of what it would look like. So they never got to the stage where they couldn't figure out exactly how such an arrangement would work. But it was the ideal of Marx and Engels, for example.
So strange, like, because you would think that an ideology would win people over by how well engineered it has the solution. But in this case, it seems like it was more some utopia that was, I mean, not any utopia, but that it was just baseless.
Yeah.
Or unfounded, since like if I want to see a solution, I want to see it engineered from start to finish. It's like I don't want to see an internal combustion engine in a car, and then they don't show me where do the exhaust go, or where do the fumes go.
Yeah.
I need to see like everything.
Yeah, that's right. But maybe it was because exactly the utopian promised, like it would be bright future for all the humanity, and we'll figure it out when we are doing things.
We'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah.
I mean, it can happen sometimes. Like if you just improvise, sometimes it can work. But it's a bit foolish and a high risk scenario to do that in like when hundreds of millions are involved.
Yeah, certainly. But I think the great tragedy of the Soviet project was the belief that end justifies the means. They certainly didn't know how to get to the end anyway, but they tried hard to establish this new state, and made many experimentations on the way, but I don't think they had a clear vision of how it would look like in the end. So
interesting. Okay, but people believed it nonetheless, and somehow it was implemented.
Yeah.
Maybe for a lack of a better alternative.
Yeah, well, one could say that maybe it wouldn't have succeeded in a country like Russia, where there was great amount of illiteracy and ill-educated people, because Bolshevik propaganda worked with these masses of workers and peasants who weren't greatly educated, and it was sort of this utopian promises and slogans and the likes. And of course, Lenin and Trotsky and the likes were more educated, but even they, I don't think they were more driven by this utopian ideology than any clear vision.
But I need to ask you this. I feel like I've dipped my toes into anarchism, let's say, and there's a big part of anarchism is not anarcho capitalism, but rather the more like leftist anarchism. Is this why that exists? Because a part of communism, or the end goal of communism, was some type of anarchism where everybody was free.
Yeah, well, of course, Lenin and his like-minded Bolsheviks would have greatly denied that they were anarchists, so that they were the more concrete socialists. So they, but it is true that anarchism was a big factor during the Russian Revolution. Like there was in present-day Ukraine, there was this Black Army group led by a revolutionary named Nestor Makhno, who tried to establish sort of anarchist utopia in Ukrainian countryside, and in some ways it would have been well, sort of peasant utopia with everyone, but of course well, I would like to ask you to repeat that question, because maybe I...
Yeah, well, I think you kind of answered it. I was just thinking, you know, with anarchism, a lot of it is like there's subcategories of anarchism.
Yeah.
There's the anarcho-capitalism, which is more right-wing, free market, you can own land, and then you have like private property.
Yeah.
Then you have the left side of it, which is more, okay, nobody rules us, but we're sharing everything, and there's no such thing as private property, so you can't own a piece of land and things like this.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, like, since the end goal of communism in this way was not really specified, that you would just abolish all authority, maybe that's why they were kind of related, these two things.
Yeah. Well, I think difference maybe between anarchism and communism in that sense that maybe anarchism doesn't have such an interim state where the sort of there is a sort of socialist state, socialist controlled the state, and but maybe anarchists wanted to more directly to sort of anarchic states and abolish all the institutions instantly. And while in Bolshevik ideas they wanted to control the state for a while, and after this stage of transformation, eventually state would die away. That was the plan anyway, but of course the end result was a creation of more horrible, oppressive, totalitarian state than anything the Tsars, for example, had created.
Right. So if I'm understanding you correctly, their idea was like, okay, we need to build this giant chip which is the Soviet Union, and while we're building this, we need the scaffolding and all of these structures around. But once the project is complete, this scaffolding will kind of disappear and rot away, and we'll just have the creation that we wanted.
I think that's a very good metaphor. Yeah, exactly like that. So you need the scaffolding for a while, but it is a sort of a means to an end.
Means to an end. Mm-hmm. That's dangerous words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that obviously didn't happen. Millions of people died, and a lot of people sat in prison for many years, decades. For example, Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah.
I read a bit in his book, The Gulag Archipelago, and it's I think anybody who proposes communism should definitely read that book.
Yeah.
Just to see how it turns out. I mean, yeah, I'm very skeptical with authority, but let's get back to Russia. We're still, weirdly enough, in the First World War, because there's a lot of things that's happening.
Well, at this point, of course, Bolsheviks win the civil war and they rule much of the former Russian Empire. So they regain Ukraine and the states on the Caucasus, for example, Central Asia.
Where is Caucasus again?
Caucasus.
Where is that again?
Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah. So apart from these Finland, Baltic states, and Poland, they regain all the lands controlled by the Russian Empire.
I hope you enjoyed that clip of the HH podcast. If you want to see another clip, click here down to your left. And if you want to see the whole unedited episode, click down here to your right. And last but not least, if you want to subscribe, you can do so here in the middle. Thank you.